manage the registration process, and she will continue to manage today during the, so Stephanie, hi Steph. She is a partner in creating all of these programs and helps in some of the presentations. When we do this live, Stephanie will be part of walking around the room and helping with the presentation. I look forward to the day we can do these live, but for today we'll have to go virtual. So we will we'll both be hiding our faces as the presentation goes on. The slides are much more important than we are. If you have questions, please drop them in the question and answer. It's a little hard to manage both chat and question and answer. So if you can drop them in the question and answer, anytime we're going to be taking short breaks in between to stop to take a look at the questions after sections. We'll also at 45 minutes in be taking a stretch break. So there'll be a 2-minute bio break where you'll be able to walk away from the screen. Please look elsewhere, look out the window, look somewhere else for 2 minutes before we come back. This will be recorded, and we will be sending out to you the slides and a link to the recording, and it will also be posted on our website for later, so you'll be able to get access to this if you need it again. And with that, I think we're going to get started. So we are in grant writing basics. What this is not is how to get a grant from the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven or the Valley Community Foundation. This is not specific to our grant making processes. This is about how to approach any funder, and it's really broad and overarching, not specific to any process. It's also not fundraising 101. There are lots of ways to raise money. Grant writing is only one of them. If you look nationally at the trends in giving, 70% of an organization's philanthropic dollars, on average, comes in from individual donors, not grant writing. Grant writing is only about 18% of the national average of what comes into organizations. So grant writing is one way to raise money, but it's not all of it. And the only thing we're talking about today is grant writing. And it is not really a deep dive on preparing financial statements for grants. That would be a 3-hour class on its own. We do those, but we haven't done it for a while. We may do it again soon, but this is just not that class. But we will talk a little bit about the financials for grant preparation. So let's talk about the basics. Now, this will sound really basic, like why is she bothering to say that? For 30 years before I came to the Community Foundation, I was a grant writer. Did a lot of grant writing. And since I've been on the other side of the table in the Community Foundation, I've had the opportunity to read for the National Endowment for the Arts, for Hispanics in Philanthropy, another national organization. I've read for the United Way. I've read for the Bank of America Neighborhood Builders Selection Committee. And I'm also doing for United Way and the Community Foundation, first as a volunteer and now on staff. So when I go over what I'm going over, I've seen these mistakes on applications. So it may be really basic and you say, I didn't need to hear that, but somebody in the room needed to hear that. So I'm going to go through the real basics of grant writing. Be on time. Don't ask for an extension. It puts you in a bad light from the very beginning. Your failure to plan ahead can't be reflected onto the grantor. So make sure you are anticipating upload difficulties. If the deadline is 5 o'clock on a Friday, don't wait till 4:45 to start uploading your stuff because everybody else is doing that. There may be glitches. Our system shuts down at 5:01, closes off. We can't say, oh, sure, you can be 5 minutes late because you can't. We can't get it into the system without going through a lot of pains to change over the system. So don't ask for an extension, plan ahead, and anticipate what you need from others. That's sometimes the biggest part of being late for a grant. If program staff or your finance office or your board to complete some piece of the grant application, anticipate what you need from them in advance, make sure they know your deadline and get that to you in plenty of time. Be complete. Check and double check the instructions. You don't want to be out on a technicality, and that's the easiest thing for a grantor to do. If they are flooded with applications, the easiest thing to say is, well, this one didn't complete the application, so they're out. Don't be a technicality. Check and double check the instructions to make sure you have everything you need, including all the requested supporting documents. Sometimes they need signatures on those things from board members, from board chair. You need a board resolution sometimes. So make sure if you need a board resolution, you're going to need to know that a month in advance to get it passed at the board meeting so that you have it for your application. So think about what you need for the requested supporting documents. And when you're doing online applications, look for links. Sometimes you'll think that a little box next to a question is information, and you don't bother to click it because you understand the question. Sometimes you're looking for additional information in that. So make sure you click on everything when you're working on an online application. Click on every little box that's there. And we'll talk about this a number of times. Match the request to the RFP. RFP is request for proposal. You have to be true to your mission. Don't start chasing money just because the money is out there. Well, if we don't really do that, but if we got this money, we could do that and we'd have money. That's not really the right grant to go for. The grantor will see through that, and it will be harder for you because you're now going in a direction that's mission shifting or mission drifting, and you don't want to do that. Be true to your mission. There are plenty of funders that will fund what you do. Make sure you're looking for those funders. And do your homework. Every grantor has on their website a list of their mission, of what they're trying to achieve in their grant making. If you start reading through a grant maker and say, wow, that's exactly what I do, then bingo, that's the one you apply to. If you read through it and we're not really a good mix, but I know they've got a lot of money, move on, find someone that is a match to what you're doing. You can find grant makers in a number of ways. You can go online to the New Haven Public Library Nonprofit Resource Center. Librarian Gina Bingham is a tremendous resource, and she will help you get through this to get into the Foundation Center online. It used to be that you had to go into the library, but during the pandemic, they have opened that up so you can have online access to the Foundation Center online. The Foundation Center lists grant-making organizations across the country. So if you put in the field that you're working in and the geography that you're working in, say you do youth services in Connecticut, it will pop up a list for you of funders that do youth services in Connecticut. You'll be able to see who they've given to, how much they give, and what their application process is. Many of them are family foundations that will say, unsolicited applications not accepted. That's an opportunity for you to take a look at their board list, particularly if they're local family foundations. Somebody on your board may know somebody on their board. There may be some personal connection. So that's how you can get yourself an invitation, is to get on their radar by connecting with their board members. Or you might want to start sending them your newsletter, not asking them for money. If they say do not solicit without an invitation, don't. Well, you can put them on your newsletter list so they know who you are. Maybe you'll get on their radar to apply in the future. So use the Foundation Center online at the New Haven Public Library website. The Foundation Center also has a grants to individuals database. So if you're not a 501c3 and you're looking for money to do individual projects, they do have a database of grantors that do give to individuals. It's much smaller than those that give to 501c3s, but it's there. And another place you can go to is grantspace.org. That has a lot of great sample proposals, so you can see how others have written to these funders, and it's a really good resource to take a look at some examples. You can also get yourself listed on grants.gov. It's federal applications clearinghouse. So if you go in and register yourself on grants.gov as a intellectual and developmental disability organization, you will get all of the feed of anything that pertains to your field. So you can register yourself there. And there are paid grant search services that you can tap into. We don't always put those on the top of our list. That's not really the best way to spend money, because unless it's someone that you've hired personally to work for your organization, what they're doing is sort of cookie cutter kind of information. And they're sending to you things that may or may not really apply to your organization. It's kind of hard to hone in on your specific organization when you're a paid grant service working across the country. So be a little careful with those. If that's how you'd like to invest your money, that's fine, but make sure you're getting your money's worth out of those. And I want you to understand the ramifications of success. When you apply for a grant, can you really do what you say you're going to do with the amount of money that they're going to give you? If you are asking for $10,000 and the program is going to cost you 15, do you have the ability to raise that other 5? Can you really do what you say you're going to do with the money they're giving you? Can you meet the reporting requirements? We talked a little about federal applications. Federal reporting requirements for grants are huge, and you have to start collecting data day one. So if you don't have the staff or volunteers who are going to keep that data clean throughout the program, it's going to be kind of hard to have a federal grant. So make sure that you know what the reporting requirements are and that you have the bandwidth to be able to meet those requirements. And some funders require a match. If they require a match, do you have the commitment up front from your board, or do you have the ability to raise the money to make that match? Sometimes grantors will require you to collaborate. Is this a collaboration? Is this something you want to work with a partner on, or is this something you want to do on your own? If you're not going to collaborate, don't look for those grants that require partners. So make sure you're reading the fine print on what the requirements are for getting the grant that you're going after. I don't see anything coming into questions and answers there. Steph, is there? I don't see anything, so I'm going to move on. We're going to do a little bit now of fundraising without grant writing. We said we wouldn't talk about other fundraising opportunities, but here are just a few, because really what this is good writing. You have to write a compelling story on GoFundMe or Donors Choose or Kickstarter to get money for what you're doing. So the same concepts around the writing that we'll talk about today can work for you in these platforms. One of the very fundamental things of the basics of grant writing, make sure that your board, your staff, your colleagues, and your volunteers are aware and supportive of the request. You want their buy-in from the beginning before you start going out there to raise this money. You need to know that they're going to be on board with all of the requirements and with the new programming that you're doing. And we're going to go on to the section about the writing. So write as if the reader knows nothing about your organization, your project, or your program. They really probably don't. In a case like a community foundation, we have generalists. We give to any nonprofit in our 20-town area. We can't possibly be experts in everything that you are all doing. So we bring in people that will help us with that to understand. We read very carefully what you write to us, but we don't have the technical knowledge. In fact, no foundation really does, unless you're going to a family foundation that is specific to the subject that you're in. A lot of scientific or research organizations or medical research, those know exactly what you're talking about. The other grantors that are family foundations and community foundations and bank foundations probably don't have the background. So make sure you're writing as if nobody knows what you're talking about. You're writing to sort of a middle school age group or an adult age group that knows nothing about what you're doing. I see the question, can we see the slide again, this title of Fundraising Without Grant Writing? We will be sending you the slides afterwards so you can hold on to those slides. Read all of the questions first. I'll be the first to say that sometimes it sounds like we're asking you the same question over and over. We're not. We know what the difference is between our questions, but sometimes it's really hard for you to understand the subtle differences in the questions that we're asking, that any grant maker is asking. So I would recommend, instead of going, whole hog onto the first question, saying, oh, I got that, and writing out your answer. Read all of the questions, sort of frame in your mind where you're going to put your answers, where you're going to put the critical information you want to get across to this funder. Where does it belong? Where does it fit best? Read all the questions first before you start answering.
And then, Jackie?
Yes.
We do have a question that came in through the Q&A.
Okay.
When foundation grants may have limited region of interest, What do you advise to statewide organizations and pursuing local regional focus, funding from foundations that have a smaller service area?
That's a really good question. Thank you for that question. So if you are a statewide organization and you're going to a funder that is a regional funder or a geographically specific funder, you're going to need to talk about the percentage of your programming and the constituents you serve that come from the area of interest of that funder. When statewide organizations come into the Community Foundation for Greater New Haven, we will only fund that portion that happens in Greater New Haven. So we want to know what percentage of your constituents. You may be based in Hartford, but 50% of your constituents may come from New Haven. That's great. If you are based in Hartford and you regularly run programming in Greater New Haven, you've got pop-up things that happen here, that's great. We'll still be able to fund that. Funders will be able to do things that happen in their region. But if your statewide organization is doing things just outside a region or somewhere else in the state, as much as the need exists, community foundations by their nature only give to the location, their geography that they've carved out in the community. So we won't give to things that are happening in Hartford. The Hartford Foundation won't give to things that are happening in New Haven. So you have to figure out what percentage of your activity, therefore what percentage of your budget is dedicated to the area of the funder that you're requesting from. I hope that answered the question. Thanks, Steph, for breaking in. We are on answer the question and only the question. I have seen so many answers to questions where people wax poetic and really so passionate about their cause that they write and write and write and write and never really answered the question that was answered, that was asked. So please be sure that you go back and read what the question says and make sure your answer is in there. And don't make the reader search for the answer. If they ask a specific question, make sure that answer is there for them. Use their language when you can. So this is a excerpt from the CERDNA Foundation website. CERDNA supports domestic efforts to inform the public and policymakers about why climate change occurs, how economic and equity issues are linked to its environmental impacts, on and on. So if I'm an environmental organization and I work to inform public and policymakers, my radar goes off because this is an organization that might support me. That's exactly what I do. I read on and I'm working on creating economically competitive, sustainable, and equitable community. Bingo, this is where I'm going to go for funding. But in my narrative, I'm going to use these key phrases. If they're true to what I'm doing, I'm going to use these key phrases, drop them back in. So CERDNA will say, wow, they really align with our principles. So I think there would be reason to support this organization. So drop in their language, but only if it's true to your mission.
So Jackie, we have another question.
Mm-hmm.
Can a question be could your response to a question be too short? And should you give some context when you're answering a question?
Chances are that maybe someplace else in the application will be that context. So you can give some of the context if you are allowed, if you have enough room to do that, because sometimes there are character limits. So if you give too much context and they can't find the answer, then you're not answering the question. So make sure the answer is clear. You can give some background if there's space to do that, but don't start going off in too many whys. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Because that's not what they asked. That will be someplace else in the application.
And we have another question. Are any agricultural grants available?
Oh, you know what? Somehow I ended up on the agricultural grant list for the grants.gov. So if you go to grants.gov, you can get on the Department of Agriculture's list and they will send you everything that's happening as a federal opportunity. Go into the Foundation Center online, You can search there for agriculture grants. And yes, indeed, I'm sure there are lots of those that support agriculture. And I know community foundations, at least our community foundation is a responsive grant maker. So if you're a 501c3 and you're in our 20-town region, we're interested in proposals from all organizations. So that would qualify certainly for us through our grant making. I don't see anything else coming in, so let's go on to, oops. Don't use acronyms or abbreviations unless you explain them. And probably the only exception to this is US, United States. Other than that, please understand that again, these are not experts in your field. So if you're going to use an acronym, you have to, if you're only going to use it once, then write it out and don't bother with the acronym. If you're going to use it multiple times, write it out and then in parentheses, put the acronym. And then from there out, you can just use the acronym. Don't assume that anybody knows what any of those acronyms are. And don't use quotation marks too much. So if you look at the quotation marks here, it makes quotation marks look really special. And if you start having more and more special things, people start getting lost. First, it's hard for the reader's eyes to have so many quotation marks around things. I'm not sure what's special anymore, and it starts to get lost. I always use the Star Wars analogy. The first time you saw the first Star Wars movie and the Death Star exploded, it was like, wow, that's terrific. It was the greatest thing ever, greatest special effect ever. And then you kept seeing it and you kept seeing it, and it was one after another. And then it wasn't so special. Oh yeah, Death Star, there it goes. It wasn't so special anymore. So make sure you're using those quotation marks very sparingly and make it easier for the reader to get through your proposal and know what's truly special. And don't use links. Don't use a link because no one is going to click it and go anywhere else, particularly if you have character limits. You're given 500 words, excuse me, 500 words or 1,000 characters. They're not going to give you space to be able to go out to a link and look someplace else at information. Excuse me. So make sure you're giving your readers all the information you need in the application. They're not going to click on a link, so don't put a link in.
And Jackie, we have another question that came in through the chat. Is there a specific style to use for a grant? So for example, what is AP the appropriate style?
It would be lovely if all grant makers could get together and decide on that, but indeed they have not. So I'm afraid there is no specific style to use. So I would stick, there is, excuse me, there is no one better than another. I think AP is acceptable, but there's no requirement on that I know of from any grant maker. If you have a track record, can't get rid of this, sorry. If you have a track record, flaunt it. If you've had success in the past, make sure you're telling stories about the great things that you've done. Talk about your successes. Provide anecdotal examples of challenges that you face and how you've gotten past them. That really shows a funder that you're adaptable, that you can work through things, that you are working in the community that you're serving and getting there. So make sure you're giving a couple of stories here and there, but don't get too warm and fuzzy. Don't have it all anecdotal. Make sure you've got some facts in there as well, some statistics, some concrete things about what you've done. So let's talk about the probable sections. Every grant maker wants basically the same information. Some want more than others, some want less, but these are the probable sections that you'll encounter when you're going through any grant application. They're going to want to know what the need is in the community for what you're doing. How do you know that what you're doing is needed? They're going to want to know what you're going to do, the proposal. What do we do? What is your plan? They're going to want to know, and we're going to talk more about each of these sections. They're going to want to know the anticipated output and outcome of what you're proposing. The output is the number of things. The outcome is what changes in behavior are going to happen. The evidence, why do you think what you're going to do is going to work? the input, what are you bringing to the table with you, and your evaluation process. So these are the basic sections of any grant, and we'll talk more about each of those sections. If you're requested to send a letter with no form, grant form, or formal questions, they say send us a letter of inquiry, you might want to use those sections to talk about your proposal so they understand you've thought it all the way through. Use those elements to frame your request.
Okay, so we have another question.
Okay.
Can a first-time grant writer get assistance with writing a grant, and what are the chances of getting approved on the first try?
The person, so can a grant writer get assistance with writing a grant? You cannot go to the funder that you are asking for money and ask for assistance on your grant. They'll talk you through sections if you need clarity on things, but they won't be able to actually help you with that. If you're a first-time grant writer and you're really lack the confidence, you might want to think about hiring a grant writer to work with or a partner to work with. And there are lots of them that are out there that are really good. My source for consultants is always to go to the New England Nonprofit Consultant Directory. That's New England Nonprofit Consultant Directory. It's a database that the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving maintains, but all the grant writers that I know, I always have register for that so that people can go there and find good sources. You can go there, search for grant writer. It will give you a list of people with their basic fees, the types of organizations they've worked with, their style, their bio, and you can choose a grant writer from there. So I would say if you would like to bring on a partner the first time just to work with you, that's a great thing to do. We also have our consultant support program where you can apply to us for limited funding to bring in a consultant on a short-term project. This might be that. You're not going to be able to hire a grant writer to do a whole grant, but if you wanted a partner to work with you just to read over what you've written, that's something that we can probably fund for you. If you want more information about that, you can contact me. Stephanie, I'll ask you to put my email into the chat so that folks can reach out, or you can reach out to Stephanie. Stephanie can help you as well. So let's put both our emails in the chat if you want information about the consultant support program. It's also on our website. And what are the chances of getting approved on the first try? If you're a good writer, great chance of getting approved on the first try. The grant reader has no idea whether you're first or whether this is, you're a veteran grant writer. So it's all about being clear and putting all the information in that they need, answering their questions, and mission alignment with the grantor. See, we have another question that came in. Do we want to stop for that? We'll talk about word limits and we'll talk about data. So the need. Use hard data to back up the need for the proposal. There are some grantors that want lots of credible sources. Wikipedia is not a credible source. But you do have to have some backup for what you're doing. What's the need in the community? You can't just say that there's a high level of poverty in New Haven. You have to be able to cite what the level of poverty is and who gave you that information. So some of the places you can go to are Data Haven at ctdatahaven.org. They have lots of good data for this region in particular. ctdata.org is also a statewide organization that does data, not as concentrated as Data Haven on the New Haven area. And Data Haven does more longitudinal research, so you can get trends better from Data Haven, but both are good sources. edsite.ct.gov, if you're working in education, the Connecticut education site has great information. You can also create your own data. If it's not out there for you, do a Survey Monkey. When we have people coming back in, stand out there with a clipboard and ask people questions, and then cite the rate of return. How many people did you survey? What was the percentage of people who are looking for information about your program or interest in that program or see the need for that program? And then you want to make sure this all relates to your mission and to the proposal that you're doing. So make sure the data ties right back to what you're doing. If you're citing national data and you're a local funder, you're a local organization, you're going to need to tell the funder, that need also exists in this community. So make sure you're not just using national data, use local data when you can. And if you're only using national data, have some kind of information about what's going on here. And I see what role does hard data play in grants for cultural nonprofits? Always a tough question. But there are things that that an arts or a culture nonprofit can find from their audience. And the National Endowment for the Arts has some really good information on how to evaluate arts organizations, the impact that arts organizations have on quality of life, on neighborhood vitality, so you can certainly get some data, some information on how to quantify and qualify what you're doing through the National Endowment and some other sources. Is there anything else for this? We're going to get back to the word limits.
It looks like that's it for now, outside
Okay.
the word limit.
Okay. So let's go on to the next section, the proposal. What will you do? This is the step-by-step, including the capturing of data, because remember, you're going to evaluate your project. So folks are going to want to know that that's not an afterthought, that you've thought about it all the way through. If your outcomes are going to be based on growth of a person or change in a neighborhood, you're going to want to get a baseline so that you can prove that you've had some growth or some improvement. So make sure that's in your proposal. How will you check on the quality of programs? Are you going to do some interim surveying to make sure that what you're doing is working in the direction you were planning on it going? How will you use that feedback to amend your program? If you do a survey, if you have a problem with a retention rate, how are you going to amend the program to get your retention rate back up? Carefully consider the timeline of what you'll do. If you say you're going to serve 100 people, are you going to serve 100 people on day one? Or do you, as soon as you get the funding, have to hire staff and then recruit people to be in the program? How long will it take you to ramp up? Make sure you're considering that timeline of what you'll do and by when. Anticipate challenges and report on how you'll address them. So if you have trouble with recruiting people, what's plan B? If you have trouble with a partner, what's plan B? Make sure that if you have things that you think may come up as challenges, make sure you're addressing them. And please be realistic. We had an organization that came in a few years ago that was planning a new sort of food distribution system. And they said that in the first year, they were going to serve 1 million people in Greater New Haven. Well, first of all, at the time, there were only 850,000 people in Greater New Haven. So not sure where they were getting that extra 150,000 people. And really, from 0 to 1 million people with no infrastructure in place in 12 months, not realistic. So be realistic. You don't have to have big numbers to impress grantors. You have to have realistic numbers to impress grantors and good missions and good outcomes. Best practice for citing data, I see that in the chat. It really just you don't need the full citation that you would have in a research paper. You just really need the name of the document and the author. So it can, if it's a study done by someone else, you want to cite the date of the study, the name of the study, and who commissioned the study. You don't need the full citation that you would have in a usual academic paper. Hope that helps. Output and outcome. So these are things that you really need to pay attention to as differences. Outputs are the numbers of things you're going to accomplish. Outputs are things like how many people are you going to serve? How many classes are you going to offer? How many meals are going to be served? How many jobs are you going to help people get? Outputs are the numbers. Outcomes are the changes in behavior or condition for a person, a family, a neighborhood, or a community. Outputs used to be what a grantor wanted to see. If one program served 50 people and one program served 100 people, then it used to be that 100-person program was better. Not the case. Now, grantors want to know what the outcomes are, because some folks work with much more difficult populations that have chronic problems or deeper challenges, and the numbers are not going to be high, but the outcome is going to be deep and meaningful. So make sure that your outcomes are measurable and are tied to your evaluation. They have to link back to your mission, what you're trying to accomplish in this particular program that you're funding, ties to your mission. Outcomes are often expressed in percentages. What percentage of people are going to change their behavior? What percentage of families are going to be better off? How is a neighborhood by percentage going to look different? And again, be realistic. You don't have to say 100% of the people we serve are going to be changed by this program. It's probably not going to be 100%, and that's okay. So I'll talk a little bit more about outcomes because they are particularly helpful in understanding how a good outcome is written is really important in grant writing these days. I've given you a sample of a logic model. There are lots of organizations that have different types of logic models. We do not use a logic model anymore in our grant making, but it is a great framework. Some grantors use it as their evaluation tool. I like to use it as a framework for writing a grant. And you can find, I think this is still on our website. If not, we will make sure that we send it to you when we send you the slides for this presentation. We will also send you a copy of the logic model. So if you're thinking about a grant that you'd like to write, you can use this as your outline. When you were in school, you always did an outline before you did that long paper. This is your outline. And if you can, in succinct bullet points here, put down everything you're thinking of, then you'll be able to write the grant. You'll be able to flesh this out and write the grant more effectively. When you look at a logic model, it does not go right to left. It goes up and down. So goals, you're going to want 3 to 5, no more than 5 big overarching goals for the program. Those are directly related to your mission. If you are an organization that only has one program, it may be pretty close to your mission statement. But the goals are, what are you trying to achieve in the program when it's all done? Assumptions. What are you assuming about the community? This ties to the need. This is before you've done the research about need. This is assumed to be true. I think there's a need for my program because students need after-school assistance. There's a need for my program because there's a population that is not being served by workforce development programs currently. These are your assumptions. You're going to go back and do the research and make them actual citable data needs. The target population, who are you going to be serving? And make this as specific as you possibly can. If you are working with Latinx females who live in Fairhaven between the age of 12 and 16, you want to be that specific. And they're low income. You want to be that specific. You could say that you're working with all of New Haven, but make sure you've got some definition. We're working through the 5-town region of the Valley. That's fine, but there is some definition to that so that the reader understands who you're going to be working with. We'll talk more about the inputs. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The activities, that's the what am I going to do? Inputs are the things you're bringing to the table. Let's go back to that. Inputs are the things you're bringing to the table, not the things that you need, but the things that you already have in hand. So you may have a volunteer corps ready to roll out the program. You may have space. You may have other funders that you've already had committed to support this program. Those are the inputs that you're bringing to the table. What do you already have in hand? The activities, that's the step-by-step of what you're going to do. You outline it here. and then flesh it out in the narrative as you're writing the grant. Outputs, the numbers of things that are going to be happening because of those activities. This is where you would put your outcomes. What are the changes in behavior that you expect, or conditions that you expect to see? And then how will you measure them? So again, you're not going to say goal 1, this is my assumption, this is the population, this is the input. You're going to say goal 1, 2, 3. These are my assumptions about all of that. This is the full target population I'm going to serve in my program. These are all the inputs that I'm bringing to the table. These are the activities that are ultimately going to reach those goals and achieve those outcomes, but these are all the activities. These are the outputs based on all these activities. What are the numbers that you're going to be counting? What are the changes in behaviors for all of these, which again relate back to the goals? And then how are you going to measure these outcomes? Outcome 1 may have 2 or 3 different types of measurement. So you're not going to be just relating 1-to-1.
So Jackie, we had a question that came in through the chat. If a funder does not request a logic model, can the writer still include it in the format of the slide?
That would be up to the individual funder. You'd have to read instructions very carefully, because if you have a character limit, then you have to make sure that your logic model fits within their character limit. If they allow you to put up attachments, by all means, include the logic model. You can also refer to it, because if it's a funder that will call you and ask questions, you can refer to the fact that you've created a logic model, and they may call you and say, gee, can you share that with us? But if they don't allow you to put up attachments, don't send it. You have to follow the instructions. First and foremost, follow the instructions. I just want to look at a couple of outcome samples, then we're going to take a 2-minute look away break. So here's an example of an outcome. I'll give you a moment to read it. Now, this little thing here is not a hyphen. This is a minus sign, because this is not a good outcome. It's, first of all, way too long. An outcome shouldn't be that long. This is probably 4 or 5 different outcomes that are in here, but a lot more information than you need in an outcome. Our unique database system allows us to measure client visits. Measuring client visits is an output. How many clients come in? That's an output. Out of care clients, output. Race, ethnicity, sex. That may be an output. One of your goals may be diversity. So it's important that you collect this information, but it's not an outcome. We also need to track income, job status, and insurances and help clients need with the Affordable Care Act. Again, not an outcome, because we're not talking about what change in behavior is happening. But I think you can see within this where there might be changes. So if they're helping clients access the Affordable Care Act, that could turn into an outcome of more people have access to the Affordable Care Act. And the outcome measure, what percentage of people that they deal with have now engaged with healthcare. I'm going to show you a few good ones. See, now it's got a plus sign. Clients will report satisfaction with mobile van services. These are clear. There's going to be an increased number of clients that will be tested for infectious disease. That's the outcome. The outcome measure clearly with that. What percentage of clients have been tested for infectious diseases? Easy to do the outcome measure when you have a clear and concise outcome. Hope that part makes sense. Again, you will get these slides. You'll be able to read these over. Outcomes are very short statements. that talk about the change in behavior or condition of people, neighborhoods, or communities, or families. Okay, so this is going to be our 2-minute walk-away break. I have 9:48. I'm going to leave us on this slide so you can see these good examples, but I'd rather you looked away from the screen, take a 2-minute break, and we will be back. I encourage you to stand up, look away, look out the window, and see you in a minute. Okay, coming back, I hope everybody had a chance to stretch, to go to their happy place for 2 minutes and stop looking at the screen. But let's go back to the work now. And we're going to the next probable section, and that's evidence. Why do you think what you're doing is going to work? It could be that you are basing it on an evidence-based model, a curriculum, a practice that is elsewhere. So if you're bringing a program in that you read about that they're doing in Cleveland or in San Francisco, talk about that evidence-based model that you're using. Talk about the research that was done behind it. Talk about the outcomes that have been happening elsewhere. If you are doing an ongoing program and you've had past success with it, that's evidence enough. Talk about your track record of success with this program. And talk about the past success of others doing the program as well. Input. We talked about this when we were in the logic model. Know your assets. And these are only the known assets, things that you already have in hand, not the things that you need, but the things that you have. If you have space, volunteers, other funders, if you have a curriculum or materials that you're bringing in from elsewhere, even in an evaluation instrument that you're bringing in from elsewhere, or an evaluator working on the program, that's great to list as an input. Leadership that is in place. Do you have experienced and qualified leaders that are going to be putting this project together? What's the skill level of those folks that are in charge? Is that an asset that you should talk about in your application? Evaluation. There are lots of ways to evaluate your project. It's going to be based on your outcomes, but make sure that if you're doing the pre and post, you've done that pre-work so that you have the foundation to work on. The state of Connecticut, for state grants, uses results-based accountability. Results-based accountability has 3 parts to it. The outputs, how much, the quality of service, how well is your program doing, and outcomes, what difference did it make? So outputs, again, the number of things, how many people, how many meals, how many jobs, how many rides to the hospital, how many pounds of food, the quality of service, how well. Are you retaining people? You may bring in lots of people, but if they don't finish the program, there's a question about the quality. So how well are you doing? Are parents satisfied with a program for their children? Are adult children satisfied with the program for their elderly parents? What is the quality of service that you're doing? How well are you doing what you say you'll do? And then outcomes. What difference did it make? What were the changes in behavior? That's results-based accountability. And that's a great way to evaluate any program or an entire organization. So think about that framework. If you want more about that, you can Google it, and there are frameworks that are available to you. There's a whole rubric on results-based accountability. If that's a good way for you to look at it, then that's one tool that you can have. And what's the future of the program? Where will it go? Will there always be a need for this program? Right now, we have lots of programs going on for isolation from the pandemic. We have programs that are vaccination programs that are educating people. How long are we going to need these programs? Are these time-limited things that you're doing? Or will there always be a need for what you do? Will the project ever be self-sustaining? No funder is ever going to give you every penny you need for the project today. And no funder is going to ever give you funding in perpetuity. So you always have to start thinking, who's going to be my next funder? There may be occasions when you start a program that you want to launch and you need to just get it going, and then you can have some funds that it generates itself. You'll be able to bring in fees, even on a sliding scale. Will it ever be self-sustaining? Will it ever have some program income coming toward it? Will you have other funders that you can go for when you have a track record and you have evidence that this program works? Are there others that you can step into? And if this is a program that you're doing as part of a strategic plan or a stepping stone in your organization's growth, make sure you're talking about the long-term vision you have. So we're starting this project now, and then we're going to expand to that, and then we're going on to the next piece. So you've got a holistic view of the constituents that you work with. Funders love to know that you've got a plan. I want you to share the proposal with the program staff and get input before it's sent. Or the volunteers. If you don't have staff, consider that volunteers, whoever's actually going to be doing the program. And you want to do that for 2 reasons. First, can you do what they say you can do with what you're giving them? If you say to your staff, here's a new program we're doing, and you're going to have to do it, they may say, not me, can't do that, it doesn't work. Also, they may be able to enhance it, because as a grant writer or as administrator, you may not be the boots on the ground that are the person who's day-to-day contact with the clients you serve. So you may have an approach, but a program staff person would say, I think we can do it better if, and they may just tweak it a little bit that's more personal to your constituency. So make sure they have some input and time to do it before the deadline. Make sure you've shared it with the program staff to let them help you tweak it. Also, share it with someone who's unfamiliar with the application. A new board member, your significant other, a part-time staff person or volunteer who's not affected by the proposal. You don't want someone to lose their job if this doesn't come in, or their volunteer position. But let someone else who's on the periphery read it. If they have questions, then the grant reader might have questions. So make sure that they have the opportunity and you have the time before the deadline to react to their questions and enhance your application before it goes in. We're going on to the financial section. Again, we're not going to spend too much time on this. And there's a lot of good information elsewhere for you to take a look. There is a website that the Wallace Foundation has. It's called strongnonprofits.org, strongnonprofits.org. It is every financial tool that you could possibly imagine that you would need. It's financial planning, it's financial monitoring, lots of good templates to use, all free, all good. So if you need information on budgeting, you can certainly look there. Again, in the financials, be complete. Read and reread the instructions. Don't be a technicality. Some grantors look for 990s and past profit and loss statements or audits. Some look for current budgets. Some look for future projections of budgets. Make sure you're giving them the information that they're asking for. And make sure numbers match. If you're doing an online application, the way most of them work is on the first page, you put in your basic information, your contact information, your mission statement, who your organization is, and then how much you're asking for in your proposal. And then you go to the next page and you put in some information about the program that you're doing, what you'd like to do. And then you go to the next page and it asks for the financial information for your budget. Well, in writing your narrative, you may have thought of some things that you hadn't anticipated before. So you go back and you tweak the budget. By the time you get to the third page, you've got that revised budget that you've put in, and then you submit the application, but you never went back to the first page where you put that total number of what you're asking for, and the budget number now doesn't match the proposal number. And the grantor takes you out on a technicality because I don't even know what this person doesn't even know what they're asking for. So how can we possibly fund them? How can we trust that they're going to spend our money wisely? So make sure your numbers match. Make sure each proposal piece has funding behind it. So when you're writing that narrative, if you're saying you're going to do a newsletter, are you actually going to print a hard copy and mail it out? Or is it just all electronic? If you're going to have the hard copy, make sure you've got printing costs and postage costs. If you're doing a program, have you accounted for all the consumables? If you need new equipment, if you need to bring in staff, how are you going to recruit staff? Are you going to put an ad in some of the online sources? Do you have to pay for those ads? Make sure all of those costs are in your proposal. Administrative expenses. This is a really hard part, but we'll talk a little bit about it. And if you want more information, you're welcome to reach out. So every time you put in a proposal for anything, you should always make sure that there are administrative expenses in your proposal. If you think a program is going to cost you $10,000 and that's your direct cost for the program, there have to be administrative expenses above and beyond that. Your office may have a telephone. You may have a copier lease. Those are not direct program expenses, but they're expenses of your organization, and the operation of your organization should be a part of every proposal that you put in. That's the way to sustain your operation. Some things may cross over from being a direct program expense to being an administrative expense, like telephone. If you are working with outreach, your outreach workers may have cell phones. Those cell phones are a critical piece of the program expense. They would be in the program expense budget. But you also have your office telephone, and that would be telephone in your administrative expense budget. There may be direct supplies in the program, as well as office supplies that you need to account for. So make sure you're putting in administrative expenses. Grantors differ for how much administration you can charge. Most don't take a second look if it's 10%. Some will do 15%. Depending on your organization, some will even do higher than that. But make sure that you're putting in something for your administrative expenses, your overhead, as some would call it, to account for every grant. Make sure that administration is in there and that you're accounting for it. So 15% is acceptable. 10% folks aren't going to take a second look. And make sure that when you're doing your administrative expenses, you're budgeting accurately for what is actually a program expense. So Alicia, I hope that answered your question about what you should ask for. 10% is a good number just to use for every grantor. But if you really truly need more, if your administrative expenses are much higher, then be sure to ask for it, because you need to sustain your organization. If you're only getting funders that are paying for your programs, that's not going to sustain the organization. And I'm giving you information about a budget form. So make sure that when you submit a budget, you are submitting your expenses, your anticipated income, and a narrative that backs that up. So they may give you a budget form guide, they may not. But if they don't, make sure you have both income and expenses in your budget. We had an application come in recently, and the request, I believe, was $30,000. And the budget that was provided for us shows that this organization has an operating budget of $454. Why would we give an organization $30,000 if they have an operating budget of $454? They don't have any expenses. So somewhere there's a disconnect. We'll work with that organization to talk more about it. But if your expenses and income are clearly laid out and realistic, it will be easier for the funder. Now we're going to talk about the presentation of your application. Again, read the instructions. This is the easiest part. They will tell you how they want it. They will tell you how many. Sometimes they want original hard copies with original signatures. Most are doing right now, especially electronically. Respect their guidelines. If they have a word or character limit, respect it. If it's a written proposal and they say double-spaced, half-inch margins, 12-point type, don't use 11.5-point type because you think they won't notice. They will. Don't make the margin an inch because you didn't write as much as they were expecting. Be attentive to what their expectations are. You can ask them, what's an average grant application? What's the length of an average grant application if it's open-ended? Don't give them 35 pages if most are 10. Don't give them 3 if most are 10. So understand what they're asking for and be attentive to their page and word limits. When you're writing your answers, sometimes when we're working in a space that has word limits, they may or may not give you a warning that you've exceeded the limit. So you're typing away passionately about your organization and you think that you just wrote the best answer ever, and you hit the return and you go, the enter button, you go to the next one, you tab over to the next answer. You don't know that because you exceeded the limit, it truncated your answer in the middle of a word in the last spot. And unless you have someone else read it or you go back and read it, you don't know that that happened, but you've already just lost your work. So my recommendation is when there are word limits or character limits, you write it in a word processing, write it in Word, copy and paste it into the space so that you've had all of your narrative. And if it doesn't fit, then you have a chance in your original document to tweak it a little bit and drop it back in. If you're preparing a non-form narrative, if they just give you a list of questions, make sure you put the question before each answer. Don't just say number 1 in the answer. Put number 1, the question, and then the full answer. If they ask for references, be sure your references are familiar with your final proposal. So when you're talking about references, you're talking about people that know your organization already. They may be past board members. They may be collaborators within the community. It may be a client or the parent or the child of a client. Those are the best folks to ask for references as your references. And they're going to know your organization. So you won't have to tell them about what you do as an organization. They will not, though, know the specifics of your proposal. So it's a little extra work on your part, but I would recommend that you write sort of an executive summary of this proposal and tell them what you're asking for, why you're doing it at this time, how much money you're asking for, what you expect the outcomes to be, and give them that executive summary. So when they get that phone call about being a reference, they say, oh yeah, I know about that project. I can't tell you the number of times I've called references and say, you know, you've been listed, and they say, oh, I am? What do they want? It's not my job as the grantor to tell the reference what this organization is doing. So make sure that you're telling folks, your references, what they need to know to be prepared to put your best foot forward. And keep a full copy for yourself. So this is my nightmare story. I worked for what's now Capital for Change. When the state of Connecticut came up with the Housing Trust Fund, there was $10 million available. And we had two programs we were proposing to DECD for a total of 1.75 million, two separate proposals. Now the state wanted five copies and 2 originals in 3-ring binders with 35 color-coded tabs for all the information that needed to be supplied. So I literally took a hand truck up to Hartford and delivered a stack about 4 feet high of 2 full proposals in these binders. And I left them in the lobby at DECD. 3 weeks later, I got emails saying that both proposals were fully funded. Woohoo. And then a week later, I got a call from the program officer that was working on that. And she asked me for a copy of the grant because they had given them to all their reviewers and asked them to destroy them. And they did. So they had nothing left of my proposal. Fortunately, I had kept a full copy for myself in a 3-ring binder, color code tab, just like they had, which gave me the opportunity to do 2 things. If they called and said, on page 11, it says this, I could whip it out right away, turn to page 11 and understand what they were talking about. I also now had the full copy to be able to give them. So we had to provide 3 audits. I didn't copy the full audit, but I copied the first page. So I knew what I had given them. So whether you do that electronically, keep it in a place where you have quick access and you know where that is. I know sometimes when we file things electronically, I have no idea where I put it. But make sure you've got a full copy that's available should the funder call you and ask you questions, and so that you can keep that for reference. That's the end of the presentation. We've been through the grant writing basics. Let's see. I think we talked about can you give some advice on grants that have very strict word limits? I've struggled to illustrate a full picture of our programs in 250 words and have not done well. So make sure that you are, again, answering the question that they're asking. Each answer can't be a full picture. You want the full application to be a full picture. But you have to answer the question that they're asking. So maybe if you concentrate more on that, then that will help. Organizations don't necessarily need the full picture of what you're doing in each answer. They need to get a sense of that from your full application. Question from Alicia, helpful on overhead. I'm also curious about strategy behind the ask. Our finance committee is hesitant to ask for what is actually needed and instead tends to request unrealistically low amount. Well, no funder will ever give you more than you ask for. I'll repeat that. No funder will ever give you more than you ask for. So you have to ask for what you really need. Within the realism of what a funder has funded in the past. So take a look at the average grant size. If the average grant size is $30,000 and you ask for 100, you're not going to get it. So think of a way to be able to come in closer to that number. But I would encourage you to always ask for as much as you can. And this is a really hard lesson for boards. It can't all be about program. It also has to be about operating the organization. So that overhead is a key piece. And I hate to use that word. It's a key piece to be able to ask for some operation money on top of the program that you're asking for. If you only ask for program, at some point your organization is going to run into trouble because there's nothing left for the executive director, bookkeeper, for the copier lease, for the electric bill, for the toilet paper. So at some point there has to be something about overhead, unless the board is willing to raise all that money on their own. And that's usually not the case. So make sure that you're asking for some of that along the way. There's a video that it's older now, but it is still a really good lesson for board members and for others to understand the need for administrative expenses. It's the way we think about charity is dead wrong. It's a TED Talk by Dan Pallotta. It's an 18-minute video that will change some boards' lives. I encourage you, Dan Pallotta, The Way We Think About Charity is Dead Wrong. It's a great video. Watch it and then share it with your board members. If a grant is denied, is it acceptable to ask for detail? It was denied to learn. Absolutely. We at the foundation, when we do our responsive grants, we always have denial phone calls. Not all grantors will give you that information. Not all grantors are as open to that, but you can certainly ask. And if they say yes, then I think they'll be impressed that you want to learn from the experience. Don't say I'd like to learn why so that I can apply again next month, but use it as a learning opportunity. If there's limited guidance on expense categories on the budget, do you have a standard set of budget categories you recommend to use? It's really so specific to organizations. I look at the strongnonprofits.org. There are some budget guidelines there, and it's all about nonprofits. So the categories are going to be there for you. There are going to be some good instruments there in your budget planning documents. So look for the budget planning, strongnonprofits.org. How do you accurately determine how much of your administration costs are legitimately related to the specific proposal? Okay, there are two ways to approach that. And the one is usually used if you have a large staff. So I'll talk about that one first because I know that doesn't pertain to you, Hank. But if you have a large staff, one of the things you can do is do your budget. And again, this is in Strong Nonprofits. There is a program-based budget. So your program-based budget has your programs in each column. So if you have 5 different programs, you've got all the chart of accounts, your expense categories listed on the left. You've got the columns going out for each separate program, and a column for fundraising, and a column for administration. Then you put all of your direct program expenses into that budget, and it totals at the bottom. So you know exactly how much you're spending on direct programs. Then you take those things that you know span across programs: an executive director, the copier lease, rent for the building, and you put those all into the administration column and fundraising in the administration column, and you come up with those totals. Then you now have a picture of your full budget. So all of the direct program expenses plus all of the administrative expenses give you your full budget. Then you go back and take a look. What percentage of your full budget is program A, is program B, is program C? If program A, B, and C are 10, 20, and 30%, then you can take 10% of your overhead and put it to program A, 20% of your overhead and put it to program B, 30% of your overhead and put it to program C. Now, there are going to be some overhead expenses that you want to keep under administration, things that are really not directly related to the program. So there's going to be an administration column that has some expenses in it. The fundraising column, there's going to be a fundraising column, like, the outlay costs for doing your gala, the restaurant, that would go in your fundraising column. the income would also go in the fundraising column against that. That does not go, it's not a program income expense. It's not a program income. It's a fundraising income. So you can do it based on either the percentage of your full budget as to what part of the administration goes to each program, or you can do it if you have a large staff, you can do it based on the percentage of your staff time. So if 50% of your staff works in one program, then 50% of the overhead expenses go to that program. But that's usually for organizations that have larger staff. If anyone wants more detail on that, I'm sure there are ways in strong nonprofits that talk about how to determine what administrative costs go where. Or you can also reach back out to me. Should the amount of the grant funding request for a job training or community educational program be less than a certain percentage of the total annual revenue for the organization? It depends on each organization. So there is no, if all you do is an educational program or job training, then that's going to be a huge percentage of your total budget. And it's going to be a huge percentage of your annual revenue, I would think. Should the amount of grant funding request for a job training or community educational program be less than a certain percentage of the total annual revenue of the organization? It all depends. The way you're asking this question for me, it would be, it all depends on the organization. If the only thing you do is educational program and job training, then your whole budget, both the revenue and the expense, are going to be 100% of your budget. But you should not be requesting 100% of your budget or 100% of any program from any single funder. Funders want to know that you have other people who believe in what you do, that you have other sources of revenue, because if they are the sole funder, that's setting them up to be the sole funder in perpetuity. So they're going to want to know that you have other sources coming in toward a program. Is it possible to receive this presentation electronically? You will have the slides, and we can talk offline. And I saw somebody had a hand raised. Let's see.
I've unmuted.
Okay.
So Elizabeth, you should be able to speak. I thought I unmuted you, but it looks like you might have to unmute yourself. Elizabeth, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. I hit the raise hand by mistake. I apologize.
Okay.
Oh, no problem. At least we know that the technology is working. So this was a good exercise for me.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I don't see other questions coming in. I can wait just a few minutes more. We had until 10:30, so it is, we have 9 minutes left. So I can hang around for a little bit. Thank you very much for coming this morning. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate you taking the time. I hope this gave you the information that you need. There is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me. I both emails in the chat. You're welcome to either of us if you have questions. And we look forward to seeing you at the next